Greetings. This slide is for the 11th and 12th of May. It's a quick overview on what the plan is, and it'll include some lecture too. Basically, today, you're going to start by rereading slides 7 through 12 on page 2 to 3. So go ahead and read these notes that you took. It should all be filled in right now, 7 through 12. When you're done, go ahead and complete quiz 2. You can do it on the same piece of paper same doc you did before, or you can create a new doc. I don't care. Just make sure it's labeled clearly Civil Rights Movement Quiz 2 and has your name on there somewhere at the top. Go ahead and push pause while you're working on this, and then unpause when you're done. Okay. Our next step will be to go ahead and continue taking notes. So go ahead and fill in the blanks on slides 13 through 18 digitally. While you're working on that, have it paused again. And then when you finish, hit pause again, and I'll just go through each slide for you.
See, you don't that doesn't even show up on the screen there.
It's okay. There we go. Okay. So as the civil rights movement went forward, things started getting worse and worse. The conflict grew and grew and grew. And shortly before receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, King receives this anonymous threat from the FBI advising him to commit suicide. It's really quite awful.
You want me to read it?
No, I'm not going to do them the dignity of reading it. But if you read it, you could see what kind of backlash someone that was about peace, people working together, and someone with a great vision was being treated hatefully. And it's really sad. In 1965, the civil rights movement had another incident called Bloody Sunday. On Sunday, March 7, 1965, about 600 people led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams began a 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And they were going over this bridge here. They were demonstrating for African-American voting rights and to commemorate the death of a guy named Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy was shot 3 weeks earlier by a state trooper while trying to protect his mother and grandfather after a civil rights demonstration. The guy took out a baton and was about to hit them in the head. He stopped him, so the guy took out a gun and shot him and killed him. On the outskirts of Selma, protesters started their walk to the Capitol, and they went across this bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And they're peaceful, but they're met by severe violence. Demonstrators were brutally assaulted by heavily armed state troopers, deputies, and white citizens. They were on horses. They beat them with sticks. They had clubs wrapped in barbed wire and glass. They ran down women. They were terrible. A few weeks later, Dr. King participated in a resumed march from Selma to Montgomery. This time, instead of 600 people, it was 25,000 people. But there was still a lot of threats and concerns that it would happen again. But it ended up being peaceable. But this violence ends up going on national TV on a Sunday, and it really was seared into the conscious of not just Americans, but the whole world saw this. And it was really quite embarrassing how awfully Americans were treating their African American population. This is a nice statement on the harms of violence and lying. but you can't stop the truth. The truth will win out. I encourage you to read that. Feel free to pause this to read that. In 1965, a guy named Malcolm X comes to the forefront in America. As African Americans were faced with continuing violence and repression, some questioned the validity of nonviolence. For instance, Malcolm X says African Americans should use any means necessary to obtain security, even if it means violent. He became the spokesperson for the Nation of Islam and called for black separatism from white America. In 1965, he's eventually removed from the Nation of Islam. He was eventually assassinated by men without connections to the Nation of Islam, allegedly. This is him. They never caught his assassins. He's a very interesting person. If you're curious about him, I highly recommend Alex Haley's autobiography, as well as the Spike Lee film starring Denzel Washington as Malcolm X. It's really quite well done, both the book and the film. But as you might guess, white people took him as a threat. And here you see him with a gun. Moving forward, 1964 and 1965, the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act are passed respectively. King's protests and speeches, they didn't fall on deaf ears. The leaders did hear him. How much time do I got?
6 minutes.
Okay.
58 seconds.
In back-to-back years, President Lyndon Johnson, this guy right here, signed two acts into law, Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. These acts ban literacy tests for voters, ban segregation in public places, ban employment discrimination. Literacy tests for voters, they would try to make you quote something from the Constitution of a state, like page 3 of the Constitution, section 3. So it's really obscure, useless kind of things. Or they would give you a jar of cotton balls and make you guess how many cotton balls were in there. Or they give you a bar of soap and say, how many bubbles does this bar of soap make?
What the heck?
What that has to do with intelligence? Nothing. All it was a purposeful way to try to keep people from voting.
It's just weird.
It's discrimination is what it is. Eventually, these laws are banned, but for a long time, it kept black people from voting. But once people could vote, then they could protect themselves legally. Eventually, de jure or legal segregation is officially deemed rejected. This is LBJ again with Martin Luther King. I believe that's Robert Abernathy there too. Abernathy actually introduced King at the March on Washington speech, I Have a Dream speech. In 1966, the Black Panthers came to the forefront as well. They were inspired by the ideas of Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael's SNCC's, who called for Black Power. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was organized in 1966 in Oakland, California. The Black Panthers openly carried weapons to protect their communities from police abuses. One time they showed up in Sacramento with guns, scared everyone. But they were demonstrating their right to carry arms and self-protect. Their leaders include Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. They also provided free lunches and breakfast program for children, which helped fight poverty. And they published their 10-point program to define their goals. This is the symbol of the Black Panther Party. This is Juan Carlos and Tommy Smith raising their fist in protest. And when they did that at the Olympics in 1968, it really caught people's attention because it was an act of defiance for the discrimination back home. Eventually, a lot of leaders of the civil rights movement start getting attacked. JFK was shot and killed in 1963. In 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. He kind of foretold his own death. You can't be messing with the times here. The day before his death, he delivered his "I've been to the mountaintop" speech, and then he's killed at the Hotel Lorraine in Memphis. Today, the National Civil Rights Museum is located there, and one of the key features is the Lorraine Motel there. His he was shot by this guy James Earl Ray, who was really at large for a while. Eventually, he's caught, but for 2 months he was on the run. More than 100 cities in America erupted in riots because they were upset by the murder of Dr. King. Symbolically, his murder ended the civil rights movement, but the struggle for justice kind of continued. This is some of the riots. This is James Earl Ray. This is Dr. King. Another person assassinated that year was Robert Kennedy by a guy named Sirhan Sirhan. It was awful. We'll get to this quiz on the next session. So go ahead and exit away from those notes. Your next task will be to do topic 8, lesson 3, successes and setbacks. And it should be the same process. You're going to be going to page 7. Feel free to start by answering questions 1 through 4. Go ahead and skip the paragraph on question 14. Together, this assignment, you're going to turn in both quiz 2 and 8.3 when you finish. Hopefully you'll do a good job. This is all subject to testing at the end of the unit. If you have any questions, again, send me an email to tsmith@lo.usd.net. This is the last of the lectures. Hope they've been helpful for you. And in this video, clip 3, 2, now.